Alright, let's talk about DHCP. What I want to do now is set up DHCP on our domain controller and then get our client, or verify that our client can grab an address from the domain controller. With that said, let's get rolling here. And the first thing I want to do is I'll just show you real quick. I can look at all the groups that have been created in Active Directory. There's a lot there. There's a lot of information on each group. I can pare things down a bit. I can use this pipe command. Again, more on that later. But I can say, you know what, just display the group name as well as the group scope. It's a little easier. So at this point, I'm showing there's a bunch of groups that have been created in Active Directory to support administering it. Some groups that don't exist yet are those used to support DHCP, which we're going to create in a little bit. So with that said, let's install DHCP. This shouldn't take too long, and then when that's done, I'm going to run the, well, I'm trying to think how to show this to you. Yeah. Actually, yeah, I know exactly what I'll do. Once this is done here, we're going to go to the server manager. And just show you something here. Alright, that just took a second. It's finished up. It does show us that the DHCP server feature was installed along with these DHCP server tools. I want to go to server manager real quick. Like, Pat, what's all this GUI stuff? But just to illustrate what's going to go on here. So we installed DHCP. We have a notification here. Complete this post deployment configuration. I don't want to do that. I'll do that in PowerShell. But what that post deployment does is two things. One, it creates our DHCP security groups, which I'm going to do right here. I have more information on this on the link here on line 79. So let's create our groups. And then our server isn't authorized yet. You can tell that easy enough by just going to DHCP. Now it's installed. And just right click on this guy. You can see that authorize is an option. So basically the server needs to be authorized to function in an Active Directory environment. So let's authorize it. So now we go back to server manager, or we go back to DHCP. A lot of times when you're doing things in PowerShell and you jump back to a console, or you're going to want to refresh it. So let's just do action refresh. F5 works also. Okay. So now you can tell that our server is authorized. And with that said, let's do one more thing. If we look back at server manager, there's still a notification here. Let's see here. Let's refresh this again. All right. We still have a notification there. We can look at our groups in a second, and we can use this PowerShell here, which is actually going to modify our registry to remove that notification. That's done. All right, refresh. Okay, good. This eventually will go away. Let's see here. Alright, so now we have a DHCP server that's been set up. It's authorized. It's ready to be configured. So we're going to configure a scope on it. Basically, a scope, as you recall from previous classes, it's just a grouping of addresses that we're going to be able to hand out from our server. Can a DHCP server have more than one scope? Absolutely. So our scope has been created. We had to name it starting and ending range. This is the name of our DHCP server, DC1, and we also specified our release time. All right. We also are going to want to in addition just to handing out addresses, it'd be nice if we could configure like some DNS information, default gateway, etc. So that's what these option values here are. So we are going to add some additional option values to our scope that we just created, the 192.168.20.0 scope, and that scope resides on DC1, so we have to specify that. So it looks like we're going to specify the DNS server, 192.168.20.101. That makes sense. We are going to specify a domain. So a lot of times what this is if a person just says ping, Pat Fader, it'll now look for patfader.itnet112.pri, and we're also going to configure our default gateway. So let's do that. Done. Again, if you're like, I'm not sure, I don't feel good about this, you can always jump back into the GUI and just see what's going on. Nothing wrong with that. There's our scope. Scope options. Those are the things that we've configured here. So let's see if it has it on there. Yeah. There we go. Alrighty. So we're moving along. Whoops. Now we're going to. Oh. You know what we're going to do real quick is we can go back and look at. Let's see here. Get some information about our scope that we created. We get information about any leases that we've handed out. We haven't handed any leases out yet, so we're getting there. But what we should see also is if I do this get, if I go back and look at our Active Directory groups, DHCP users, DHCP administrators. So those are the two groups that were created in Active Directory. And this is kind of interesting. You'll have to read more up on this, but when you run this, when you set up DHCP on a domain controller, it creates these domain local groups. If you create it on a member server, it actually creates local groups. So if you want so on a member server, members of the local group are able to manage your DHCP server. On a domain controller, members of this group here, these groups here, users and administrators, can interact with your DHCP server. And real quickly, what it is in some environments, if you're a domain admin, this doesn't matter. I'm a domain admin now, and that's why I'm able to get in and look at DHCP and manage it and stuff like that. But in some environments, you don't want the person that's managing DHCP to be a domain administrator. You just want, he or she to be able to manage your DHCP server, create scopes, etc., or look at scope information and server information. So that's why we have these two groups: DHCP users and DHCP administrators. And users can read only; they can look at your DHCP server and how it's configured. DHCP administrators can manage your DHCP server, create scopes, make changes to it, etc. So that's it in a nutshell. Let's move on and let's test this from our client. So now what we're going to need to do is jump onto our client, and I may have to modify a few things on this as I'm sitting here, but we'll see. I'm going to need to configure my client to get its addresses via DHCP and not be statically configured. So what I'm going to do is let's just do this real quick. Let's go to our client, log in. I ran the ISE and it just shows up as administrator. If you're logged in as a regular user and you're launching PowerShell, you may need to right click on it and say run as administrator, especially when you're making system changes. So let's run this. See if it works. I can tell things are happening. It's done. All right, so now we should be able to get an address from our DHCP server. I'm a little bit worried. Sometimes you need to configure VMware Workstation or Fusion to disable its internal DHCP service. We'll find out if that's turned on or not in here. So let's go back. Well, here, let's just do Let's just kind of jump back and forth between our machines. Let's get net IP config. Let's see what's going on here. Man. Shouldn't complain. This is pretty fast. I was just running my VMs off an external USB, and it's really slow compared to running off an internal SSD on my laptop. All right, 192. Oh, look at this. So we have an IP address 192.168.20.200. That's one of the addresses coming out of our scope. So it's working. Configured our DNS server, configured our default gateway. Let's jump back here and let's take a look at our scopes. I kind of like it when things just happen to work without too much jumping through too many hoops. All right. Let's see if that shows up now if I do run line 112. Okay, so I have a scope. I can see the address that I've handed it out. And I actually get the MAC address there. I could use that if I wanted to create a reservation. And at this point, we could actually just test to see if we can ping our client. If it fails, we may need to turn off the firewall on our client, which I can do. I'll just pause while that runs. All right, we see that the test net connection did work. We were able to successfully ping our server. If that wouldn't have worked, what I would have done is I would have jumped onto my client and I would have turned the firewall off. Basically, if you recall, in a domain of there's client machines in a domain environment have three profiles: a private profile when you're in a private network, a public profile that you would use like if you're at Starbucks, and finally a domain profile, one that you would use, one that's a profile that would be used when you're like within your company walls. You're part of a domain. So I just am taking all three of those profiles and I'm setting them to false. I could have done the same thing through the GUI. I think this will do it. What's going on here? Interesting. Oh, it's interesting. This is showing that our client. Oh, you know what I did? I haven't joined my domain yet, so. So it looks like we're not using. Well, I don't know what's going on with this. So we're currently in a private network. I think I need to fix this. Well, it's not for this demo, but if in fact my machine is part of our domain, which it is, I can do that. I can get there a couple ways. So this is currently part of our ITnet 112 domain connected to ITnet112.pri. Man, oh man, maybe it would just take a reboot, but this is not right. We definitely would want to have our machine associated with this domain-based network, not the other one, not the private one. And I know there's a PowerShell way of doing this. I just can't remember off the top of my head, so won't worry about it. Okay. So with that said, we now have DHCP up and running. Further testing, what I would do if I was doing this within a company is I would go into Active Directory and I would add a test user account into the DHCP administrators group, and I would add a user into the I'd add a user in the users group and a user in the DHCP administrators group, and just see what happens. It would be really easy to test if I would just create those accounts and allow them to log on locally onto my domain controllers just for testing, and I would avoid having to remote into a system or manage it remotely, and just get a feel for what each of those two groups can do. And then larger organizations, obviously, I think that would be important. In a small shop, it's very likely that your domain admin is also your DHCP administrator. All right. Well, thanks for taking the time to watch this, and have a great day.